We'll intervene whenever we decide it's in our national security interest to intervene. And if you don't like it, lump it.
The problem with America is not that we go around marauding around the world imposing ourselves. The problem with America in the last 10, 15 years since the end of the Cold War, really in the last 60 years, is that we've been too slow to get involved.
I don't know how many Iraqi civilians were killed, but I can assure you that the number is the absolute minimal that it's possible in modern warfare.
Every nation in every region now has a decision to make. Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists.
You know, that land over there is yours. You'll go back to it one day because your fight will prevail and you'll have your homes and your mosques back again because your cause is right and God is on your side.
Welcome to the darkened hour.
Welcome to another episode of The Darkened Hour. I'm your host, Adam Fitzgerald. With me today is Dan Christensen. Mr. Christensen founded Florida Bulldog in 2009 using the name Broward Bulldog. He is an award-winning former investigative reporter for the Miami Herald and Daily Business Review, and one of South Florida's most experienced reporters. He holds undergraduate and graduate degrees in political science from the University of Miami, and the Florida Bulldog is the preeminent publication regarding the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks, past and current Saudi involvement, including the Justice Against Sponsors for Terrorism Act, which amends the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act and the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act in regards to civil claims against a foreign state for inquiries, death, or damages from an act of international terrorism. Dan, thank you very much for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me, Adam.
Oh, by the way, what gave you the idea to start the Florida Bulldog in the first place, and who is Anthony Summers?
Well, I started Florida Bulldog after I got laid off as an investigative reporter for the Miami Herald back in 2009. I think I was in the third round of layoffs after the newspaper industry sort of hit the iceberg. And I hadn't been there very long. I'd come over from another paper. And I realized that I did not want to sell floor shimes or do flip hamburgers or things like that. And so I contacted an attorney in town, a guy named Tom Julin, and who I had met on occasion, and asked him about the possibility of setting up a not-for-profit news site. These sites were beginning to emerge around the country and have continued to do so. And we are part of a group called the INN, or the Institute for Nonprofit News.
Why was the September 11, 2001 terrorist attack such an important issue with Florida Bulldog?
Well, it was an important issue because I got drafted into this sort of by Anthony Summers. He and his wife, Robin Swan, had written a book called The 11th Day back in 2011. It had not come out yet, but I've known Tony. He lives in Ireland. I've known Tony for a long time. And he contacted me, said that they had developed this lead. There wasn't time enough to get it in the book. Would I be interested in helping him report it out? And I said, yes, absolutely. And that's how I got involved in all this. Because when September 11th happened, I was working for a paper down here called the Daily Business Review, which is part of the American Lawyer Network. I covered federal courts, and but we did not cover the 9/11 attacks.
Well, let's just start off with a recent bombshell you just reported on Monday regarding former U.S. Saudi Ambassador Prince Bandar Bin Sultan, who refused to acknowledge a court-ordered deposition by U.S. Magistrate Sarah Newbern. Could you tell us more about this?
Sure. Prince Bandar was the ambassador to the United States between, I believe, either 82 or 83 and 2005, I think it was. And so he was the ambassador at the time of the terrorist attacks. And he was pretty vocal at the time, going on, Larry King Live and Face the Nation, other national television shows in defense of Saudi Arabia. And so I found it interesting that he, and perhaps telling, that he refused to testify when asked to do so by the lawyers who represent the victims and the family members and survivors of 9/11 who were suing Saudi Arabia.
Is it a reason for him not to acknowledge the deposition because he may know more about Saudi financing than he would then have to implicate himself, do you think?
Well, I mean, who knows what he was going to say. We do know both Anthony Summers and Robin Swan wrote a story for the Bulldog a couple of years ago after they managed to get a copy of the statement that he made to the 9/11 Commission, which had been kept secret for quite a long time. And there wasn't a transcript of it, but there was a memo about it. And it showed that he wasn't asked any serious questions about, his knowledge of 9/11 or the events of 9/11. And, the lawyers, have a number of questions that they'd like to ask him because he's, since all that time, nearly 20 years ago, we've learned some very interesting things about him. One of the most interesting is that he, or not that he, but that his phone number, private unlisted phone number for his the company that manages his ranch out in Colorado, it's a 90-acre estate out there, was in the personal phone book of a guy named Abu Zubaydah, who was one of the guys who was picked up on the battlefield in Pakistan, and later, frankly, tortured by the United States and has been held at the Guantanamo base ever since. What was his phone number doing in that guy's phone book? We don't know. We'd like to, the lawyers would like to ask him. I'd like to ask him. And there's other questions. Money from he and his wife, Princess Haifa, were sent to a guy who had contact with the hijackers and is suspected of being a Saudi agent obviously prior to 9/11 in Southern California. There's questions. Why did that money go? Supposedly the money went to pay for this man's wife's medical condition. But I've been told that that was a bogus story. The question becomes, why did you send that money to them? And then there's a whole host of additional questions about Prince Bandar that, frankly, I think he's obliged to answer.
In 2016, during a Freedom of Information litigation, you were privy to an active FBI investigation called Operation Encore, which was involving Musaed al-Jarrah, Fahad al-Thumairy, and Omar al-Bayoumi, who had all came into contact with two individuals who would later be suspected of hijacking American Airlines Flight 77, Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi. What did you uncover here?
Well, we had sued the FBI. We sued the FBI twice. The first time was for information about things that happened here in Florida that I'm sure that we'll be discussing in a few minutes. But the second lawsuit was for the files of what was called the 9/11 Review Commission, which was a group that was put together in, I believe it was in 2014. They issued their report in 2015. They were a sort of a creature of the FBI. They were formed by it. Their members included Ed Meese, the former Attorney General under President Reagan. They were paid by the FBI. They were spoon-fed information by the FBI. And they issued their report in 2015. And their ostensible purpose was to examine whether or not certain recommendations that had been made by the original 9/11 Commission had been instituted by the FBI. So they looked at that, but they also looked at new information that had come out since the 9/11 Commission closed down back in 2004. One of the things they looked at was the stuff that we reported on here in Florida about Saudis living over in the Sarasota area who had contact with the hijackers. And they sought to debunk that In the course of that report, they mentioned an October 2012 FBI summary report. And so I requested a copy of it, along with all this other information from the 9/11 Review Commission. And they released it after we sued them. They didn't release it until months after we sued them, but they released a very heavily censored copy of this, which came to be the first public acknowledgement of what was called Operation Encore, which was essentially an FBI investigation into Saudi complicity in 9/11. And it was a very intriguing thing. Apparently, from what we can tell and what's been reported by ProPublica on this and the New York Times, I don't know, it split the FBI, let's put it that way. And it created, it was an investigation that went on between approximately 2007 and 2016. And they were looking to charge people with being providing material support, I believe is the phrase that's used, to some of the hijackers. That never happened. But in this October 2012 thing, which is somewhat in the middle of this, it disclosed this information that they were looking at. And it showed that there were, the names get very confusing here because we're talking about names that Western minds aren't familiar with. These are Arab names. And so they can be confusing to a lot of people. But there were a couple of people that were named in that report whose names had come out previously. A guy named Fahad al-Thumairy and Omar al-Bayoumi, who were living in Southern California at the time. Thumairy was a diplomat and a member of the Los Angeles King Fahd Mosque. And they had contacts, connections with the hijackers. Bayoumi befriended them, did a number of different things to help them after they landed in the United States in January of 2000. And they became the focus of the litigation that's happening up in New York, the massive civil suit up there against Saudi Arabia that's brought by the victims of 9/11. And the reason that that's the focus is the federal judge in the case limited discovery to what happened in Southern California, and specifically to whether or not there were connections between the Saudi government and Thumairy and Bayoumi. So that became a very important part of this. And that was sort of featured in this 2012 FBI intelligence report. So after we got a copy of it, we were contacted by the attorneys for the families up there, and we provided them with a copy of that. And it's since become a centerpiece of the investigation in New York. They have attempted to try and get a full version of it released. They managed to get little bits and pieces of it, but not much more than we got. And it became even a matter of greater controversy when Attorney General Bill Barr, who was President Trump's Attorney General, personally invoked the state secrets privilege to keep that document and related documents secret. And all the reasons that were given only to the judge and weren't made public. So we only know in a general sense what they were arguing. But essentially it boils down to national security, which is an argument that we've heard before and often has not held water when it's been proven. So when the documents in question later became public, we found out that national security really wasn't involved.
Correct, right. to go back on that point about Sarasota, because I think this is an important area. On September 5th of 2012, you filed a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit in the federal court in Fort Lauderdale against the Department of Justice, in which a 25-page FOIA complaint seeking records of an FBI investigation involving a Saudi family who were former residents of Sarasota who may have provided aid or assistance to the 9/11 hijackers. The person of interest was Abdulaziz al-Hijji, who lived at 4224 Escondido Circle, but the home was owned by Isam Ghazawi. Can you give us a backdrop on this and what happened with the FOIA request?
Sure. This was the original point of entry for myself on this whole thing, because this was the lead that Tony Summers had developed. He had spoken with a senior counterterrorism agent who had been involved in this directly, and another gentleman who was the head of security and also a resident at a place called Prestancia, a very large upper class development over in the Sarasota area. And so this was our first story in October of 2011, which is 10 years ago now. And we reported then that this family, the al-Hijji family, 2 weeks before the September 11th attacks, they sort of abruptly left their home in the Prestancia development. They left behind cars, new cars. They left behind clothing. They left behind stuff in the refrigerator. They left behind they left behind everything, including an open safe in the master bedroom. And they flew to, we later found they flew to Washington, met up with Mr. Ghazawi up there, the al-Hijjis did, and then they all flew back to Saudi Arabia. And they didn't come back for at least a couple of years after that to reclaim and sell the property.
It was suspected that Mohammed Atta and Marwan al-Shehi, members of the Hamburg cell, had visited this residence, which is the reason why there was an interest into the Hijji family.
Yes, and we knew that because the counterterrorism agent and the security director at the development there, his name was Larry Berberick. They told us, both Tony and myself, about how the FBI had collected records from it's a gated community, and from the gates, when cars would come in, they'd photograph license plates. They would also have the drivers sign in, say where they were going, and those sign-in books and also the photographs of the license plates were turned over to the FBI, according to both these gentlemen. And what happened to all that? We don't know. The FBI later said that they didn't obtain this information, and that's why they couldn't turn it over to us, because they had never obtained it, which sort of seems to fail FBI 101, since that would be the one thing that you could do to determine who went in and out of that development. But the bottom line is that we know from these very reliable, good sources that was the case. And we also know because later on, after we filed that lawsuit, we got stonewalled initially for a full year. They wouldn't respond to our simple request for information under the Freedom of Information Act. So we sued. And about 6 months later, I went out to the mailbox one day, and there was a package from the FBI, and in it were a number of documents, the most significant of which, again, was highly censored here, that stated that the people that we were looking at had, quote, many connections, unquote, to people involved in 9/11. And that, by the way, was diametrically opposed to what the FBI had said publicly about this, because when Tony and I broke the first story, which we ran on our on the Florida Bulldog website. The same day, the Herald, Miami Herald, purchased the story from us and ran it front page of the Miami Herald. They came out and said a day later, by the way, in advance of the story, we contacted the Department of Justice. They said they wouldn't have any comment. And then the FBI, the day after the story comes out, says that contacts a reporter at the Miami Herald, not me, and for some strange reason, and tells them that that while indeed they did do this investigation over in Sarasota, that they found no connections between the people involved and 9/11. And, you know, that was later put to, you know, the lie was put to that by this document that was released that showed that, in fact, there were many connections. Now, what those connections were, they blanked out a lot of stuff, and they have been unwilling to release any other information, even though they have as many as 80,000 other pages about all this in their records. And we know that because that's the number of documents that were turned over relating to 9/11 from the Tampa field office, turned over to the judge in our case to look at for his eyes only, and never released to us because they've all been classified, which seems to be a rather sweeping use of the secrecy stamp.
Just to follow up on that, you also report on two individuals. We some Taysir Hammoud and Adnan Gushnair El Shukrijumah, who was the alleged chief of global operations for al-Qaeda, and who was suspected to have visited the home of al-Hijji prior to 9/11. Now, the 9/11 Commission would later write in its final report that Shukrijumah's father is a well-known imam in South Florida and who once testified on the behalf of Sheikh Omar Abdul Rahman, an Egyptian cleric, during his trial for the conspiracy in the Landmarks plot. Can you give us some background on Shukrijumah?
Yeah, Shukrijumah lived down here. He attended Broward College, Broward being the county that Fort Lauderdale is in. He came up in our reporting, both in the initial story when it was the counterterrorism agent said that they had picked up information that he had either visited the house or been in telephone contact, I believe, with people at the house. And but also I spoke with a guy who's was, and I believe still is, in prison on a federal weapons charge. He had connections to Hezbollah, according to the government. And he said he knew this al-Hijji fella and said that al-Hijji once tried to recruit him to fight in Afghanistan, and that he also introduced him to Shukrijumah at a soccer game in Sarasota back prior to 9/11. If that's the case, that just is another large brick in the wall here that seems to demonstrate that Mr. al-Hijji had some very interesting connections in the terrorist world.
Which I believe, I think al-Hijji was actually killed in.
No, al-Hijji is alive and well.
Oh no, I'm sorry. Yeah, Shukrijumah is actually.
Yeah, Shukrijumah was killed in Pakistan by the Pakistani military 3 or 4 years ago.
Well, and by the way, you were.
And they had, by the way, shortly after 9/11, the U.S. government put I believe it was either $1 million or $5 million bounty on Shukrijumah's head.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And what happened to al-Hijji, by the way?
Al-Hijji, they left the country, and he, for a time, moved to London. I understand he's back in Saudi Arabia now, but he was in London, and we actually caught up with him there.
Oh.
Yeah, Tony Summers and a guy from the Daily Telegraph who he was working with tracked him down, and they ended up speaking with him by phone. We got a couple of pictures of him that we used in some of the stories that the Daily Telegraph ran and we ran, in which he denied having, any sinister involvement, any involvement in 9/11 at all. That was the most important thing that he had to say. was that he had no involvement in 9/11 at all.
Florida seems to be such an epicenter for pre 9/11. And there's so much mystery surrounding Huffman Aviation, which was previously owned by Rudy Deckers when he bought the company in 1999. Now, Deckers has since been arrested for drug distribution charges, cocaine and heroin, and also suspected of exporting state-of-the-art computer memory chips out of the U.S. illegally. However, this is where both Mohammed Atta and Marwan al-Shehi had conducted their flight training and got their commercial rated licenses from December of 2000. And you've reported on this regarding Huffman Aviation. What is your story surrounding Rudy Deckers and Huffman?
Well, I mean, I've spoken with Rudy Deckers before he got busted. You know, I mean, he had talked to a number of reporters and certainly federal agents long before I got to him. So he didn't really have anything new to tell me about what happened there, but he acknowledged that they had been there and that they had trained there. They trained at other locations too, in South Florida and perhaps other sites. I'm not all that sure. But I will say this, the one thing that the FBI did put out that's been very useful is they put out a chronology that you can find online.
Yes.
Of the movements of the hijackers. I mean, you know, they went to an ATM to get money, and they will say that on such and such a date they went to the XYZ bank and made a withdrawal or something. And matter of fact, where I live in Florida, in Fort Lauderdale, they used to drive up and down the street right near where I live, a place called Commercial Boulevard, and they went to a tire store. Marwan al-Shehi, the guy who flew into the South Tower, he took, I believe he took Atta's car, and he bought tires at a tire store that I frequent back then. I frequented back then, and I had been there that summer with my son. I may have been there the same day. I don't know that he was there, but later on, when I found out, it certainly sent a chill up my spine. I'll know that.
Yeah. And it seems that when they landed in Florida, the intelligence apparatuses were closely monitoring them, all the way even from Germany, when they were a part of the Al-Quds Mosque in Hamburg, Germany. And this is the reason why they got the nickname Hamburg Cell. In 2002, the FBI drafted its report regarding the high flyers, who were employees at Urban Moving Systems, and they were suspected of being a front company for Israeli intelligence. One individual who was part of that group, Omar, was said to have lived just temporarily in Florida, where two of the lead hijackers, Mohammed Atta and Marwan al-Shehi, had lived for a brief time, I believe, Hollywood, Florida. One house located on Sheridan Drive was owned by Henan Sarfati, a lead agent in the Israeli art ring, which was an Israeli spy intelligence ring that infiltrated the homes of like the DEA and the FBI. And most of these Israelis were deported back to Israel without any further investigation by the Department of Justice. Was this also a heavily protected area, similar to like the Saudis?
You're asking me something I do not know much about,
Right.
So it would be best for me not to say anything because
Okay.
I did not report on that, so I'm not familiar with it.
Well,
my
that's-
reporting has focused on two areas. One is what happened here in Florida, and also what's been going on up in New York City, where the lawsuit is.
Right.
But I would like to say something about what happened here in Florida. When Tony Summers and I were first working on this story, we went, what happened in Sarasota, went to talk to former Senator Bob Graham, a Democrat from Florida, who had served as the co-chairman of Congress's joint inquiry into 9/11. And by joint inquiry means the House and the Senate got together and looked at 9/11 for about a year prior to the 9/11 Commission. And we went to him to tell him about what had happened here in Sarasota, and he didn't know anything about it. And he was pretty upset, not at us, but he was upset that the FBI had not told him about this, because the FBI was supposed to inform the committee of any information that it had about 9/11, so it could be properly looked at by Congress. They didn't do that. They kept this investigation secret, for 10 years until we found out about it and reported on it. And they acknowledged that it had happened, but said there was nothing to it. So the question, part of the question becomes, why did they keep this secret? Why did they not tell Congress about this? Why did they also not tell the 9/11 Commission? There's no mention in the 9/11 Commission documents or report about this particular incident. They said they did notify the 9/11 Commission about this, but nobody at the 9/11 Commission that we spoke to, including the guy who was the co-chairman of it from
Richard Shelby.
no,
Bordegas.
Yeah, it was Kane and
Thomas Keene and Lee Hamilton.
Yeah, Lee Hamilton, that's the guy. He didn't know anything about this. I tried to reach Kane, he didn't know anything about it, or I couldn't get to him. But I did reach Lee Hamilton, and he knew nothing about this. And we reached some staff people that weren't aware of this too. So the question becomes, why were they keeping this secret? And why also did they ship the agent who had worked the case, a guy named Gregory Sheffield, off to Hawaii, either while this investigation was still going on or shortly after it ended, about 2 years after it began? We don't know the answers to those. I've tried to reach out to this Agent Sheffield. He hasn't responded to my requests. And the FBI, they're, shall we say, not helpful.
Sure. And you just answered my question regarding Bob Graham, because I was going to ask you about Bob Graham regarding the Sarasota Saudis.
Yes, he was very upset that he didn't know about this. And later on, interestingly, he took it upon himself to contact the FBI to ask them about this and, why he wasn't informed of this. And remember, he had a top secret security clearance. He was also, was serving on a commission involving the CIA. So he contacted them, and they spoke with him briefly, and they showed him some documents about this, including what proved to be the many connections memo that we obtained through FOIA later on. When he got it, when they showed it to him, he was under a pledge of secrecy, so he couldn't tell us what was in it. But he did tell us that it was diametrically opposed to the public statements that the FBI was making at the time, which later proved to be the case when we got our hands on the document ourselves. And none of this is adding up here, except for the only reasonable explanation here is that they were protecting Saudi Arabia because they were our putative ally in the Middle East here, an ally that Senator Graham would call our perfidious ally, and which I thought was a rather accurate statement. Yeah. So, that's sort of the weirdness of this whole story. The FBI has not come clean about it. To this day, the families are still pushing through their attorneys to get this information. We're hoping that the Biden administration may open things up because, I also reported about a week ago that the government has notified the court that Operation Encore has now been closed. Prior to that, they said they couldn't release anything about it because it was open. But now they've said it's closed, and they're said that they are going to re-examine what can be released and do so expeditiously. So we will see.
Are you familiar with Shea Sullivan, a former reporter of the Longboat Observer?
I know the name, but I don't know the person.
The reason why I'm asking is because I once emailed Shea Sullivan from the Longboat Observer about an article he wrote way back in 2001, just weeks after 9/11 had happened. And he talked about an incident involving the Colony Beach and Tennis Resort when a van full of Arabs posing as press wanted to speak with President Bush, who was staying there while on a school visit at the Emma Booker Elementary. Are you familiar with this incident?
I'm familiar with the allegations. I talked to some people that said they had knowledge of it at the time. It does seem like something happened, but I haven't been able to get anything more about it.
Right. Just to give you a heads up, because I spoke with Shea Sullivan, he basically said that he got information from a former fire official who was at the security gates where Secret Service was at. And when the Arabs went to try and interview Bush, they said, well, we don't have your name. Could you call Human Resources? And they drove away. Sullivan went to interview the official and the guard at the gate, and he wasn't involved with interviewing Secret Service. But then when he went to report on the story, the Secret Service actually went and visited Shea Sullivan and his editor and told him not to run the story. Incidentally enough, just 2 days prior to September 11th, on September 9th, Ahmed Shah Massoud, the leader of the Northern Alliance who's fighting against the Taliban, was actually killed by 2 al-Qaeda members posing as journalists. And there was this almost like this correlation between maybe trying to assassinate Bush while he was at the school. And that's the reason why I tried to contact Shea. I contacted Shea Sullivan, talked to him about the issue. But the FBI basically told him not to run the story. And I found that to be quite peculiar. You have any opinions on that? Or?
Yeah, that is peculiar. And they didn't succeed, which is good.
Right.
And that little twist on it I was not aware of. So thanks for mentioning it.
Sure. You know, there was an article, I had not known about this. And thanks to your article, you wrote this, I want to say, about 3 or 4 years ago, regarding Saudi Arabia citing FBI's Meese Commission in asking a judge to toss the lawsuit against them. Could you speak more about that issue?
Well, all I know is that they sought to use the conclusions, and they've done this with the 9/11 Commission as well.
Right.
They're saying, hey, look, there have been these official investigations here. They've all cleared us, ergo, we didn't do anything. That simply is not the case. I mean, you can talk to the individual members of the 9/11 Commission, for instance, and they will tell you that they were not cleared, that there were certain statements that were made, but those statements do not clear them. They simply say that we have no evidence.
Right. Just to for my listeners, Ed Meese is the Attorney General who was authorized by Congress to conduct an external review of the FBI's post 9/11 performance. And the April 2002 report, which was released to you by the FBI in the 2013 FOIA, according, the FBI told the Meese Commission in 2002 that the report was poorly written and wholly unsubstantiated. And I think there was this, and we're both going to agree, is that the FBI, even today, continues to basically cover up Saudi complicity regarding the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks. And I think it's basically because it's in the State Department's best interest to do so because of the enormous decades-long relationship with the Saudi lobby.
Well, that certainly appears to be the case. I mean, is it definitively proven? No. But it's, all signs point in that direction.
Right, because I can't see, I mean, this is something I've tried for a couple of years now to try and understand why there is such a stonewall. I mean, I recently just interviewed Ken Williams, the author of the Phoenix Memo, a former agent, 25 years in Phoenix, in regards to the FBI asking him to not help with the victims' families, the 9/11 victims' families, in their lawsuit against the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And he basically went against that and did testify on their behalf. It just, and he says that the reason why he said he was in shock that the FBI would ask him to do that.
I know, and he's not the only one. I mean, there's a number of different former FBI agents that are now, working for the attorneys for the families here, trying to dig out information. And one is a woman named Catherine Hunt, who had been a counterterrorism agent here in the United States and also overseas in Iraq. And she started looking into some of the information about, that was out there about Operation Encore. She used that October 2012 report that I mentioned before. And she dug up some new conclusions, new information, new names that actually I ended up putting in a story just about a week, 10 days ago about all this.
And, I'd love to ask you about your, if you're aware, in the days after September 11th, 2001 terrorist attacks, there were reports by CNN, MSNBC that talked about extra airliners that were that had found weapons, knives taped to or box cutters taped to the back of food trays, making 9/11 even potentially even a bigger operation. Now, Bob Graham, who we spoke about just previously, even stated to the Real News Network, to Paul J, in 2012, that he even acknowledged that 9/11 was supposed to be even a bigger operation than just 4 planes. I've reported on this, and I did a separate podcast about one plane called United Airlines Flight 23, where there was 3 Arab men. The plane never took off because they were called back to the gate. 3 Arab men got into an argument, and then when they left, security officials found their luggage, and behind it there was box cutters and al-Qaeda manual. One had a license from Florida, a flight training license. In the days afterwards, CNN, MSNBC started doing reports about other planes finding weapons about this. Was this something that was known to you at the time?
I not at the time, but certainly when I started looking into this, I heard about. I'd only heard of one example of the one you mentioned about the 3 Arabs that were taken off a plane, but they never, there's nothing solid about it. There's no, as far as I know, there's no information with the names of the people that were involved. Anything that's concrete there. So is there something to that or not? I don't know, and I don't know if it's been thoroughly investigated. My suspicion is it has not been.
Yeah, I've actually filed a Freedom of Information request regarding the flight manifest of Flight 23, and I was told that I needed a warrant, and I think that was the right answer because I'm just an independent investigator myself. But I found it to be highly interesting because if that was the case, that would basically follow the original thoughts of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who is the alleged 9/11 mastermind. He's currently in Guantanamo, where he brings up the idea, if we're to believe what he has said, and this is backed up by Ramzi bin al-Sheikh, but also a financial courier and mastermind of 9/11 itself, both at Guantanamo, where they both said, and even to an interview to Yossi Fuda of Al Jazeera in 2002, where they said that the original plan was to involve 10 planes. And he brought that idea to bin Laden, and bin Laden basically said it would involve too many people, and he said they'll think about it. And then there was a second meeting involving Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and bin Laden, and they agreed on 4 planes. And
right. Well, it's certainly not out of the question that there could have been at least one additional plane.
Right.
But I mean, this was a pretty extraordinary undertaking in terms of the logistics of it.
Sure.
And each plane you add adds a huge complication factor. So I don't know. All I know is that there was enough destruction from the ones that we had, but you would hope that the FBI checked out these other claims that there were other planes involved. But again, I haven't seen anything particularly written about this that would discuss all this. And from my vantage point here, you have to remember, I'm a local reporter,
Right.
and Florida Bulldog is a small operation. I am the only actual employee. I've got 5 or 6 other, veteran freelancers that I work with, but we don't have the ability to do the kinds of investigation into this matter. I mean, it's already become a lot broader than I had originally thought it would be. I thought it would just focus on Florida, and then all of a sudden we're involved in looking at what happened in Southern California and other places around the country.
Yeah, let me touch on that too. I mean, for such a small group of people, you guys are, you report on such important topics, and it's unfortunate because these are the topics you would think that the legacy media would be salivating on, especially the Sarasota incident, just to use that as an example. And there's so many stories that you report on that I'm like aghast at how there's almost like this willful ignorance or total dismissal regarding anything relating to Saudis, their involvement, and to the State Department or to the Department of Justice. And you're like a small group of people, dedicated investigative reporters. Here you are against this monolith of disinformation that's or just abject refusal to report on the facts by the legacy media.
Well, there's 2 things that have struck me about all this. One is when Khashoggi was butchered, and that story deservedly got a lot of attention. But it was kind of like, well, wait a minute, that was one person. What about the thousands of people that died in 9/11? Why aren't you coming back to that? And there's scant attention paid, and especially in New York. I mean, first of all, in Washington and New York, this is a local story in both places because this is where this happened. But in New York, even more so, because there's active litigation up there. There's, I mean, this is what you do when you're a newspaper. You cover big cases. This is a big case. The New York Times isn't really covering it, and I don't understand that.
Have you been pressured by the FBI
No.
No.
The FBI does their best to ignore us.
Is that because of the fact that you're such a small group of people and they don't think that you'll be able to be a threat to them?
I don't know. Who knows? I mean, they don't communicate with us. But I will say this, that the other day, we were represented in this litigation pro bono by a couple of different law firms, and their names are Hunton, Andrews, and Kurth, and Gunster. Gunster is where Tom Julin works, and Tom Julin has been he's been the principal attorney for us. He's a First Amendment guy, a super lawyer, and the government, they had made a claim for a lot more than they got, but the point is the government settled that, paid $50,000, and these 2 law firms donated it to Florida Bulldog to allow us to, continue. So I think they should get some credit for that. They didn't have to do that, and they did.
Oh, I think that's fantastic. I just thought of something in my head too. I had not known this. You reported that there were that lawyers told a federal judge regarding that Saudi agents were intimidating 9/11 witnesses abroad.
That's what the lawyers up in New York.
New York, right? Yeah, right.
So,
yeah, I did not. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I don't know the details of it. All I know is this was the assertion that was made in some of the court documents filed by the attorneys. They didn't provide details. You got to remember, there's an FBI gag order in effect up there, So there's a lot of information doesn't ever get out. For instance, they just got finished deposing a variety of different Saudi officials. None of those depositions are matters of public record.
Right.
And will they ever come out? I don't know. But I will tell you this, is my understanding that the way this case is unfolding now is that sometimes towards the end of this year or early next year, the Saudis will once again move to have the case dismissed, contending that that the plaintiffs in this thing haven't made the connection. And then the judge will have to decide whether or not he's going to toss this case, which will obviously cause an appeal, or whether he will allow it to continue. And if he does allow it to continue, it's again my understanding, and I'm not an attorney, but I've talked to some of the attorneys involved in this, that they would then be able to expand the area of discovery to look at other areas where there was activity by the hijackers, including Florida, Arizona, New Jersey, Virginia, places like that.
You know, just to touch on that just a little bit, the 28 pages, which were the pages from the Joint House Inquiry Final Report that alleges Saudi financing to some of the 9/11 suspects, do you believe that that's just tip of the iceberg? Do you think that there were more classified documents that could show a more broader conspiracy involving more players involved? Or do you think otherwise?
I mean, there's no way to know, but yes, I suspicion. I mean, why are they going to I mean, they've been trying very hard to keep a lid on this. But they're going up against some very savvy lawyers. I mean, it's not just one law firm. There's a bunch of law firms, a bunch of very smart lawyers involved in this whole thing. You know, why is the United States government sitting when they go to court? This is one of the things that bothers the family members. When they go to court, they'll see the U.S. representatives sitting on the same side with the Saudis.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine you'd feel the same way. You'd be pretty upset about that if it was you.
I think it's demoralizing to say. It's also self-defeating. But Dan, what are your future endeavors regarding 9/11? Are there any more documents you're going to try and pressure the State Department or the FBI about declassifying in the future?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I'm working on a FOIA request as we speak. Most of our reporting is going to be confined to seeing if we can develop further things that happened here. We do have some additional leads on stuff that we haven't been able to pin down, but we're going to keep trying.
Sure.
And certainly we're going to be covering what happens up in New York. What's interesting there is stuff, every now and then begins to be little bits and pieces become unsealed and they appear on the docket. And when they do, if I spot them, I'll report on them.
Sure, absolutely. And in regards to the 9/11 truth movement in general, and it seems, it's something we talked about before our recording session, in that what I think is troublesome, to say the least, is that there are certain organizations, one of them being an actual committee of lawyers called the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, which is headed by Dave Meesweekle, Barbara Honegger. And if you don't know those names, Barbara Honegger, who once served under the Reagan administration, who purports that Flight 77 did not crash into the Pentagon. And Dave Meesweekle, who is one of the co-founders of the Lawyers Committee, shockingly doesn't believe a plane crashed into the Pentagon in Shanksville. And these are lawyers. They just actually got their citizens' rights denied by the Southern District of New York, which was filed with 8 co-plaintiffs involved with the 9/11 victims' families. Could you basically give your some advice to these fringe conspiracy movements about whether they're hurting actual law firms like Motley Rice and Creedler in their case against Saudi Arabia by purporting these outrageous scenarios?
Well, I don't know if that would do any good.
Right, yeah.
We have, it's not just on this. I mean, look at what's happening out in the country with the virus and vaccinations and things. People are, there're just a lot of people that don't believe anything that has in any way, any connection back to the government here. All this seems to trace back years ago to me. It seemed to begin with the Warren Commission, and then you had Watergate, and then you had the Iran-Contra, and all these various episodes where things happen, and I just and then God knows there were lots of other ones that I've left out, but there's been an erosion of trust there, and it's sad because it in this particular case. Well, in both cases, I mean, I'm certainly not an expert on the vaccines, but it seems pretty clear that you should be getting vaccinated out there. And it also seems pretty clear, because we saw it with our own eyes, that planes hit these buildings. I mean, with the Pentagon, I mean, tell that to the husband of who's that woman who was on Flight 77 who died? Her husband was the Solicitor General of the United States.
Barbara Olson.
Yes, Barbara Olson and her husband. Tell him that it was a missile strike and not the plane. Then where is Barbara today? Okay. Where are all the other people that were on that plane? Where's al-Hazmi and al-Midhar? Well, they're disintegrated when the plane hit the Pentagon. That's what. So, it seems to me that they're wasting people's time and effort, and they ought to look where the actual evidence is, not some fantasy.
Dan Christensen, former investigative reporter for the Miami Herald and Daily Business Review, and the founder of Florida Bulldog. Thank you very much for coming on.
All right. Thanks for having me.